Hi guys! I know Easter is a little crazy this year. It's not the way that we normally do things. We're not able to gather in our churches and sing songs together and have our picnics and gather with families and have Easter egg hunts. However, I wanted to share how when we have our Easter picnic, we usually do the resurrection eggs, and I wanted to share that with you guys. This tells the story of Jesus and his last week here on earth. So normally a child would come up and they would choose an egg and they'd get excited about what they were going to find in their egg. Of course, I can't do that. So I'm just going to share what's in the eggs with you one at a time and share the verses that go along with it. So the first egg, we find a loaf of bread. The verse is Matthew 26:26, and it states, "While they were eating, Jesus took a piece of bread, gave a prayer of thanks, broke it, gave it to his disciples. 'Take and eat it,' he said. 'This is my body.'" This was taking place during the Last Supper when he gathered with his disciples in the upper room, and they were celebrating Passover. And this was to commemorate the breaking of his body when he would have to be crucified upon the cross. The second egg. In this egg, we find 30 pieces of silver. And I have 3 dimes to symbolize that because each one is worth 10 cents. So 30 pieces of silver. This is what Judas took when he betrayed Jesus. Let's read the verse. Matthew 26:14-15 says, "Then one of the 12 disciples, named Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asks, 'What will you give me if I betray Jesus to you?' They counted out 30 silver coins and gave them to him." So Judas was one of Jesus's disciples, one of his friends, so he thought. And Judas betrayed Jesus for merely 30 pieces of silver. A devastating act of friendship, I guess, showing that he truly wasn't his friend. All right, the next one has our purple linen, our purple felt. And our verse with that is Mark 15:17. They put a purple robe on Jesus. This is when they were making fun of him, beating him, and they placed a robe on him because he was saying he was the king. He was the king of the Jews, and the people were making fun of him, and they placed a purple robe upon his shoulders. The next egg shows a crown of thorns. Crown of thorns. And the verse that goes with this is Matthew 27:29. "Then they made a crown out of thorny branches and placed it on his head and put a stick on his right hand. Then they knelt before him and made fun of him. 'Long live the King of the Jews,' they said." So again, this is a thorny crown. I don't know that you can see it very closely. But they placed this crown of thorns upon his head and pressed it in. Can't even imagine how that felt upon his head. I don't want to feel the thorns of a rose bush, much less a crown upon my head. All right, our next egg we open. It's a rope or a whip. Well, my whip is kind of gotten old, I guess. But anyway, this is to represent a whip. And let's read the verse that goes with this. Mark 15:15. "Pilate wanted to please the crowd, so he set Barnabas free for them. Then he had Jesus whipped and handed him over to be crucified." So Jesus was one of the prisoners along with Barabbas. Apologize. So he was a prisoner with Barabbas, And the Jews at the time of Passover were given, they were allowed to take one of the prisoners and let him to be set free. And they had a choice between Barabbas, who was a murderer, and Jesus, the Son of God. And the Jewish people just shouted over and over again, free Barabbas. And so Jesus was kept the prisoner. All right, our next egg. It shows a cross. Of course, this cross is a pretty cross from a necklace. But the cross that Jesus carried was just a wooden cross. So our verse for this is John 19:17 and 18. He went out, carrying his cross, and came to the place of the skull, as it is called. In Hebrew, it is called Golgotha. There they crucified him. So again, the cross that Jesus carried was made of wood. It was a very simple cross made from 2 beams of wood. And he was made to carry it through the streets and up to the hill where they placed him upon it. All right, our next egg. Oops. This is our 3 nails. And our verse that goes with that is John 20:25. Thomas said to them, unless I see the scars of the nails in his hands and put my finger on those scars and my hand in his side, I will not believe. So these nails are to represent the 3 nails that hung Jesus upon the cross. And this verse is talking about Thomas. Thomas doubted. He had his doubts. He was afraid and he didn't know what to believe. And he said that he would believe if he could see the scars in Jesus's hands and in his feet, and put his hand in his side. And those scars are what helped him to believe. All right, our next egg. This you can't see very good at all, but this at one time said King of the Jews. This was what they wrote on the top. They made a plaque and they placed this at the top of Jesus's cross. Luke 23:38 says, above him were written these words, this is the King of the Jews. And these were true words, but the people that placed them there believed that they were making fun of him and being derogatory. Little did they know that they were actually putting his true title above him. All right, our next egg is a sponge. I don't know if you can tell that's a sponge. And our verse is Matthew 27:48. One of them ran up at once, took a sponge, soaked it in cheap wine, put it on the end of a stick, and tried to make him drink it. When Jesus was hanging upon that cross, he was very thirsty. And he had said, I thirst. And one of the Roman soldiers took a sponge on the end of his stick, on the end of his spear, and dipped it in vinegar, like very fermented wine, and tried to make Jesus drink it. And can you imagine? I mean, just the smell of vinegar makes me pucker. So I couldn't imagine trying to drink that, especially after what Jesus had been put through at that time. Sorry, I can't get my egg open. All right, my next egg shows the spear. It's a very crude little spear, but this is to represent our spear. The verse for this is John 19:34. One of the soldiers plunged his spear into Jesus' side, and at once blood and water poured out. Jesus had died. He was on the cross, and Jesus had died. None of his bones were broken, but they had to prove that he was dead. And one of the soldiers took his spear and plunged it into his side, and blood and water spilled out, proving that he had already died. Our next egg is a rock. And this is, let me read the verse. Let's see. Matthew 27, 59 through 60. And it says, Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a new linen sheet, and placed it in his own tomb, which he had recently dug out of solid rock. Then he rolled a large stone across the entrance of the tomb and went away. So Joseph of Arimathea came and said that they could put Jesus, told his disciples that they could put Jesus in his tomb. He had just recently dug out his own tomb, and Jesus had no, he didn't have a tomb ready for his body. But in order to seal that, they rolled the stone in front of the tomb to close it up. That way, no one could get in and take his body. All right, and then we come to our last egg, and we open it, and there's nothing in it. And this is when we tell the children, this is to represent the empty tomb. For after 3 days, Jesus laid in the tomb, and on the third day, the stone had been rolled away, and the tomb was empty. Jesus wasn't there. And it was because Jesus had risen. He was no longer dead. He was alive. And that's our great comfort during this Easter season. Jesus isn't dead. He is alive, and he's here with us. And it's a great comfort to us, especially in this crazy this crazy time that we're going through, not knowing what's coming or why we're at home or those sorts of things. But we have Jesus to look forward to. So I hope everybody has a happy Easter, and that you enjoyed our resurrection egg demonstration. So have a great night.